When injury takes you out of the game, it's time for your team to step up. At Alina Health Orthopedics, you'll get expert care backed by a whole health system of providers with convenient locations, virtual options, and an app that gives you 24/7 access to your records, test results, and care team. You're always close to the care that you need. Schedule now at alinahealth.org/ortho.
Good morning, afternoon, or evening, depending on when this finds you. Welcome to the Sound of the Loons podcast, presented by Alina Health Orthopedics. I'm Steve McPherson, and I'm joined once again by Callum Williams. Cal, it's been a rough couple weeks for Minnesota United and Minnesota United fans, I would say. How are you feeling?
I'm tired, Steve. Really tired. I don't even know, Steve. I don't know what's left, what's right, what's up, what's down. I'm tired. 3 games in 7 days is a lot of work. But glad it's busy. I sound like I'm complaining here. I'm not complaining. I'm tired. I'm happy that we're all busy because let's be honest, it was only a few months ago we weren't even sure that we get to be a part of a season. So it's good. I'm just tired. How are you?
I'm okay. I'm okay. I think I'm doing all right overall. I think that with regards to how we thought this season was going to go, like I feel a little bit like it's a little mini pandemic for Minnesota United in the sense that like last season started and then suddenly we were like, we don't have games. We don't have, what are we doing? Like, this is not what I expected this season to be at all. And I feel that kind of same thing again after like I look back to just like 6 weeks ago and I was like, preseason was good. Team looks good. I like a lot of the additions. There's players, who are on the horizon who are coming to the team. And now we're sitting here at 0-4 or 0-4 or 0-4-0. They changed the format on MLS soccer and I'm all confused about 4 losses and no points. And just not sure, where it goes from here. I think I'll start. Let's just talk about the most recent game. We'll talk about Colorado Rapids, a 3-2 loss. I'm going to give you the microphone now, and you can just give us your feelings and your impressions and your sense of that game as it unfolded.
First of all, Steve, I've got to point out that I'm drinking a cup of tea right now. And
okay.
The reason I'm doing that is because usually it calms things down. I suggest everybody go and drink a little cup of tea. Everybody just needs to calm down. I understand it's not been the start to the season anybody thought. I understand the reason why people would be slightly concerned. I think people need to go and have a look at a lot of other periods of previous seasons for Minnesota and to see that the Loons did go 0-4 throughout the season in previous years and still made the playoffs and still had good seasons. Every team, every year, goes through a bit of a barren run. At the moment, Minnesota's barren run is coming at the start of the season, which, for whatever reason, seems to ensue panic. And I think it's okay. I understand, and I can hear people now chirping and saying, oh, well, he works for the team. Of course, he's going to say this. This is me talking from a pure footballing perspective. It's okay. We've got 30 games left. This isn't the NFL where things are over after you start 0-5 or whatever. It's going to be okay. Am I a little bit concerned at the start? Of course I am. But to suggest that people need to start talking about the manager being let go, to start suggesting already that trade to be done and that certain players haven't worked out, I think is honestly I think it's too early, Steve. It's really too early. I've seen all the stats. Throw me any number this week. I've seen it, Steve, in terms of people saying, well, only 2 teams in MLS have got into the playoffs when they started 0-4, and that was last year in the Eastern Conference. I've seen all these numbers. Like, I get it. I get the worry. I understand people being concerned. But for me to sit here and agree with people suggesting that Adrian Heath should be let go, I think is completely wrong. I think it's way too early. Usually in Europe, you give a manager between 8 and 10 games to get it right, which I think is fair because that's usually over a 2-month period or so. And then you judge. I think if Minnesota go 0-6 over the course of the next week, I think there's certainly room for conversations to be had in terms of why is it going so wrong. But I think it's far too early to suggest that the coaching staff are in trouble in terms of their jobs and players should be traded and what have you. I think it's far too early for that, Steve. And look, I have no problem saying I thought in Colorado in the second half, I thought Adrian got it wrong. In the sense that I think what Minnesota should have done is they should have gone and tried to get the third goal and really killed the game off as early as they could. But instead they sat back, absorbed a lot of pressure, which eventually Colorado found a way through 3 times, very nearly 4, maybe even 5, with Bassett hitting the post and Lewis scoring the goal that was offside. So yeah, I'm not going to sit here and defend Adrian Heath completely because I thought he got it wrong in the second half in Colorado. But what I will say, Steve, is that for people to suggest already at this stage of the season that he needs to lose his job and things need to change drastically, I think is completely and utterly wrong. And I think hence why I brought up the T comments. Let's just relax. It's okay. There's 30 games left. Let's just relax.
I think we'll move on to Colorado. I think you're starting in a good spot, and there was a couple of things that I had jotted down that I wanted to come off of some of the stuff that you have brought up. I think a couple of things for me. First of all, I think calls for Adrian Heath to be fired right now in a lot of situations ring a little hollow to me because the people who I see it from, I'm not, I am on social media. It's a lot of the same people who have said that for 4 years. Like people have been, for whatever reasons, at different points, have been thinking that the solution to everything that is a problem with Minnesota United is firing Adrian Heath. And I just don't think that's right. And so when your solution to this is fire Adrian Heath, I'm like, well, I've heard that before. And instead, the team has gotten better every year, basically up until this year with a very odd beginning. So, it's a thing, like you said. I think that you give, if you're talking about 8 to 10 games, that's the point at which you start considering, like, is this the right direction overall for the franchise? As far as the idea that, like, something you would do right now would fix this, as you said, and it's the thing that's been tossed around, only 2 teams that were from last season, NYCFC and CF Montreal, lost at least their first 4 games and then still made the playoffs. That also means that 0 teams lost their first 4 games, fired their coach, and then made the playoffs. Like, that's never happened. So I don't think, like, if you decide that it's time to move on from Adrian Heath, if that's the decision, that's changing the trajectory of the entire idea of the team for the future. That is not the way to get the team to play better right now. Like, you might get a bounce, like the different things happen in sports, but I just think that, like, this is the way the team is right now. You have to deal with it. And, if the decision down the road is you want to go in a different direction, okay, fine. But right now, it's not going to make the team get into the playoffs suddenly if you fire the coach. Another thing to bring up, which you sort of alluded to, and you're talking about, seeing different numbers and things like that. I was looking at some advanced, analytics, things about expected goals. We've talked about expected goals before on the broadcast. I'm calling it broadcast because we got that fancy slate that said broadcast on this podcast. The Loons, the goal differential right now, I'm sort of cribbing from the storylines thing I already wrote. The goal differential is -7, which is tied for worst in the league. Same as FC Cincinnati right now. They've scored 3 goals and allowed 10 goals. That's bad. If you look at the expected goals, again, which is expected goals is essentially every shot that a team takes is measured based on how likely that shot is to go in. A shot that's right in front of the goal has a high expected goal rating. One from distance has a lower expected goal rating. And then the teams who are playing each other, each team is accumulating this expected goal idea so that by the end of the game, you sort of have a sense of how many goals you would expect based on the quality of the chances. That's the thing. If you look at that, let's see, Minnesota's expected goals is 5.02. So higher than the 3 that they have actually scored. While their opponents is 6.85, which is considerably lower than the 10 that they have scored. That means that the expected goal differential is negative 1.83, which is a lot less than 7. And actually, the gap between those two numbers, which is 5.17, is the widest in the league between those two results. So basically what it's saying is, that doesn't mean that Minnesota United is better. Like, the results are the results. The team doesn't have any points to show for it right now. But what it's saying is that the team should have scored more goals, and they shouldn't have conceded as many goals overall. And you can see that looking at the goals they scored. That first goal they gave up by who was the Sounders player? Joao that guy.
Paulo. Yeah.
Yes, yeah, Joao Paulo. I mean, a worldie. Like, that goal is unbelievable. And so there's been more of those goals that are like, you wouldn't expect, but they go in and then we hit the post, things like that. So as you said before, it's like, the team is close. Like, if the team were trash, like if it were just like couldn't play, okay, wholesale changes, but the team in some ways is very close to being, to doing well. And it just hasn't happened yet. So, when you have a leaky faucet, you don't uninstall the entire sink and then put a new sink in. Like, you try to figure out what is causing that leak. And I think that's the issue that's at the fore right now. Okay, that was my response. Talk specifically about Colorado, please, unless you want to just respond to what I said.
No, just in terms of the entirety of the season so far, Steve, I think a lot of it has been down to individual errors. As I said last week, I think it's obvious that Chase Gasper is really suffering with his confidence. I think he's overthinking things, and he's been caught out a lot. Again, going back to the game against Colorado, if you think of the first goal that they scored, Acosta was a great hit. And there's very little you can do about a strike like that because it comes through the bodies and what have you, and it's difficult for the goalkeeper. The second goal, I think Dane St. Clair will want that one back. I understand the rain makes the ball slippy. I understand the ball skips off the surface, and I called it a routine save, a routine catch on the broadcast, which may be a little bit harsh on him. But the more you look at it, the more you think you should probably get rid of the danger there, whether it's catching it or at least pushing the ball away. But in the same vein as well, how often have we spoken about a Dane St. Clair mistake? Hardly at all, So every goalkeeper makes a mistake from time to time. I think this is his 20th game or something, and it's the first time we're really talking about him conceding a goal and him being at fault. And the third goal, it was Chase Gasper's rash challenge that led to the free kick. And I thought the marking was poor. I thought the defending was poor, and Wilson obviously took advantage in the 83rd minute or whatever it was, And again, Steve, it goes back to what we've said previously about Minnesota. They burst out of the gates in the opening half, and they high press so well, and it really works. And then what happens is the opposition play a high line, and it doesn't allow them to press as much as they want to, and it forces everything back. And Reynoso loses the ball deeper again, and it's an issue then because, as I said, it instantly puts the back line under severe pressure because everyone's bombed forward. As soon as Reynoso gets the ball forward, what's the fullbacks? They go straight away, but then he loses it, and then there's gaps behind them, and it's a problem. So, but a lot of it stems from not having a pressing centre forward, I think. And then, as I said, individual errors have cost the team big time. I think, as I said, Chase Gasper has been at fault for a few this year so far. I think Jukka Raitala has looked a little more settled. But I don't think it was his greatest game against Colorado. I don't think Mitaneer had a particularly great evening either. Michael Boxall's the only one really right now who I think could walk around with his chest out, really, because maybe Robin Lord as well. I think both of them have given about everything, to be honest, but it's just not been a good start. And I thought Jan Gregush's quotes were interesting after the game as well, when he said it seemed as though the pace of the team disappeared. It seemed as though, what was the quote? It was something along the lines of there were so many bad decisions made, so many bad individual decisions made, So all this is going to take, Steve, and I know I'm not I'm not really, again, sounding encyclopedic here, but all it will take is a win. All Minnesota United need is to just win a damn game. And once they do, this spell will disappear and everybody will hopefully forget about it, because then I think once they get this monkey off their back, they will then start to move forwards and win games and operate with more confidence, because I do think that's an issue for them right now. You know, what was it prior to the Rapids game? As we said, 53 shots and 1 goal. It's obvious that there's a confidence issue in front of goal. But then also from a defensive point of view, as I've said several times now, Steve, I just don't think they are at the races. I think there's been a lot of individual mistakes, and all it will take is just for them to win a game. But what I will say is if I think they really have to win one of these next 2 games, because if Minnesota start the year 0-6, I think there's going to need to be conversations to be had in terms of, as you mentioned before, what's the overall direction of the club? Where are we going? Again, I'm not suggesting that's when Adrian Heath should be let go, because I don't think that's the case. I just think, you know, perhaps there needs to be a conversation in terms of changing things up tactically and maybe moving a few players around and what have you. But right now, it's far too early to start having those conversations, Steve. But let's make no doubt about it. This week's a huge week for the season for Minnesota.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think your point about getting a win, getting, even, a point, like you said, if both these games are lost, that's a huge problem. If you can get 4 points out of 2 games, that's great. If you can get 6, even better. I sort of felt that watching the game against Colorado as they went up 2-0 heading into halftime. I was like, maybe this is the get right game. Like maybe this is the game where, like, because they looked great. That first half, as Adrian has said, the team looked about as good as they've ever looked. Not just the goals were great. And then I was particularly impressed with it looked like Colorado went for that surge going into the half. Like they just wanted to grab a goal back before they went into the locker room. And, Minnesota really stood up to the pressure at that point, like really withstood it. It's not, defense is not always pretty, but they kept them off the board going into the half. And I was like, if you can put those 2 things together, like that's the way, this should go. And then, to lose the game like that, you really could not have lost a game where you needed a win in a worse way. It was like so familiar to the Seattle game, in the playoffs last year. I mean, the same final score and in a lot of ways, the same kind of texture to the game and the way it was lost. It was tough to watch. And I agree with you. Like, again, the thing that I was thinking of is how, previously we've been talking, and you talked about before, how there's been so many individual mistakes. Jan Gregus, again, sort of acknowledged it and saying in certain places, Chase Gasper's been found wanting right now. Brent Coleman had a really terrible game, his first game out there against the Sounders. I think if we want to call it individual mistakes, I think you're right. I think Adrian Heath made the wrong call in how he managed the game down the stretch. I think he deserves a lot of credit for adjusting at the start of the game. I think one of the things that he's actually been sneaky, really good at through his whole tenure at Minnesota United is adjusting to the other team. If you think about getting that win away at LAFC, a couple of years ago, sort of dealing with San Jose when they're sort of the thinking person's darling of the league. He's figured out a lot of teams. And I think that like going to that 4-3-3 gave them a lot more resolve in the middle of the field. And it didn't let, and he had talked about how they weren't good in either of the boxes. They were good down the middle third. It meant that the ball moved through that middle third a lot faster. It meant that it was harder for Colorado to get the ball back through that middle third in the opening half. I thought that tactical adjustment was fantastic. I thought that as the game wore on, into the second half, as Colorado sort of started to build into it and Minnesota just looked gassed. Again, it's Colorado. It's hard to go to Colorado and play. People start running out of energy. Minnesota had exerted a lot of force in that opening half. It just seemed clear that the team was losing steam. And, Adrian sort of stuck with his philosophy of the players who start the game, they deserve the chance to finish the game. And I just think it was one of those moments where at that time you maybe got to say, we just need fresh legs, like wherever, and not even necessarily a huge tactical shift, but just like some new blood out there to kind of bring the energy level back up and just sort of stall out the Colorado's attack.
I was surprised when Brent Coleman came on. I will admit that, Steve. And I thought, I understand why Adrian did it, because it got to that point where there was a ton of momentum behind Colorado. And Adrian, having started the season like his team have, he's kind of thinking at that stage, we need to get out of here with the points, and let's just take a point, get out of here, and build on this, which would have been very good. And had you offered a point to me before the game against Colorado, I'd have taken it happily, no problem. A couple
Absolutely.
of goals as well, taking it no problem, because you can build on it. So I understand why he brought in Brent Coleman. I think a lot of people were probably surprised and a bit frustrated with it, though. That's certainly the indication I'm getting from people that have, hit me up on social media. I think because of the way that Minnesota started, and because of the scoreline at the half, and because I think everybody would prefer a manager to go for it and go and win, as opposed to being defensive minded and let's be honest, do the sensible thing, really. So I can see both sides to it for sure. I get people's frustration, but I also understand why Adrian brought on Brent Coleman. I was surprised that we didn't see another body come into the centre of midfield. I thought maybe Ja'Cory Hayes could have come in and offered a little bit of energy off the bench. I wondered. At one stage we were told DJ Taylor was going to come in as well. I guess at one stage he took his sub beanie off and was going to come in, which would have made sense as well, because he's a bundle of energy. So yeah, I mean, look, it's just obviously not been a good start, Steve. But I've always said this: I would back Minnesota against anybody at Allianz Field. And having had a good conversation with several of the Whitecaps contingency over the last 24 hours, I'm really, really intrigued to see how this game goes, because no doubt Minnesota United need a win.
Yeah, I think that. I find it interesting to think about like the sort of coaching philosophy, or the idea of like, again, when are you proactive? When are you reactive? Questions about who do you bring in and when do you bring them in and things like that. I think that there's not just two ways to look at this, but I can sort of, I tend to think of you see sort of at least two of the ways to look at this. Is there's a sort of more old school idea, which is that sports is a crucible where teams are built through adversity, as the players sort of learn to achieve higher heights together, as they sort of come together and they sort of exceed what they thought they could do as a team. That's great. That's exciting. And that's the narrative that you see a lot in terms of sports documentaries and things like that. The other side of it is that, another side of it is that sports is sort of a riddle to be solved. Like, it's a tactical question, and it's a matter of leveraging your best players at the best moments and sort of trying to make the game easy as possible for, players to do as best as they can. And those things they're not oppositional. Like, they don't cancel each other out. But, I think that Adrian is sort of comes from that first school of like, you put players out there. I mean, you see it in so many things he says, right? You pick the starting 11 because you believe these players are going to go the distance for you. Like, you believe that work